So I'm James Wulfgar. I run Wulfgar Weapons and Props, or Wulfgar Props now, and then also I run Cos Awesome Studios. I've been cosplaying for about 15 years now, give or take. And before that, I really liked like Halloween and things like that. I've been a professional prop maker for about 10 years now, maybe 11. And I have my own costume shop. So Wulfgar Props, like I said, there's about, at any one given time, I probably have about 10 to 16 contractors that work for me, and we just make costumes for film and movies and cosplayers and theater and really whoever wants something. Like there's a lot of collectors who are like, I just want something cool to put on my wall, or a lot of Twitch streamers that will be like, hey, I play this game and I really want this cool thing behind me. We make it all. It's not really specifically for any one group. And we are probably about a third, like collectors, film, and cosplayers. But my passion and my real way into this was cosplay and is cosplay. So today I'm in costume. I don't intend to ever stop cosplaying, even when I'm old, that sort of thing. Like I said, feel free to answer to raise your hand for questions, but I'm going to go ahead and get into it. So, very first thing is, let's start at the beginning where it's prep, right? So this is prop making 101. Think about your prop before you make it. Figure what you want to do and what you don't want to do. I am doing an advanced cosplaying or prop making one tomorrow. I'm probably going to cover a lot of the same type of stuff. I'm not going to talk about like hot glue much next time, right? This time I may. But like I said, I'm happy to just share tips and tricks. So one of the biggest things that I learned over the years is if a customer is like, hey, I want this big giant scythe, or I want this giant sword, or whatever, right? I have to ship it to them, right? They're in Colorado and I'm in Indiana. There's a problem, right? I could maybe pay somebody to drive it out, but that's ridiculous, even though sometimes people want that. But for the most part, things have to break down. And when things have to break down, they have to be made very solidly. So just understanding when you're in, anybody who's packing for a con, you don't want, I joke because one of the very first spears my wife ever made, she was like, this is perfect. I'm like, this is awesome. And then we try to get it in my car and it's like, it doesn't fit in the car. So I guess we're taking the van. And then it was like the whole length, like I drove with it, like sticking out of my peripheral, right, the entire way because we didn't plan, right? That said, there's nothing wrong with winging it and making sure that happens, but just like anything else, preparation's key, especially if you're doing it professionally or if you're doing it to the point where you're making it for somebody for money. If it's your own thing, that's actually one of my favorite things. If it's my own thing, cool, I can make it however I want. It can be this 16-foot pole that I just only use in my backyard for whatever, right? That's fine. But think through it. And along with that, if you're going to make something break down, understand that while a lot of people will use PVC, right, for poles or for structures. It's kind of advanced, but I want to tell you about it right now. You can use aluminum tubes, and they actually are all sized, or there's a lot of them that are sized the same as PVC, right? So an aluminum thing's not going to set off a metal detector. It's going to be lightweight. It's going to be good enough that you can take a drill through it really easily, right, and make holes in it so you can make connectors. Please don't be afraid to mix media either. And when I mean media, I mean this materials, right? So you'll see a lot of people who are like, hey, I do a bunch of stuff with foam. The costume I have on right now is a bunch of foam. I've done tons of things with 3D printing. 3D printing has changed drastically over the past 10 years and then over the past 5 years. And there's nothing wrong with doing casting and 3D printing and a bunch of stuff all together, all at the same time. Don't pigeonhole yourself in the same thing. And then another thing that's very simple, that, if you're building a prop and somebody wants a leather belt around the top of their hat or something, just go get a leather belt from Goodwill and see if you can get one that looks like it and chop it off and put it around the thing and glue it together and you're good. I literally did that last week. The guy was like, hey, this hat you made me looks great, but I want a leather band around it. I'm like, that's cool. And it sucks because it's already basically done and I've already done all the work for it, but he wants a leather band. I got to get him a leather band. I could either sew up a leather band to make that happen, or I went into my belt bin and was like, "Hey, does this work?" And I like kind of showed him a picture, and he's like, "Yeah, that's great." Snip, snip, super glue, done. Right? He was happy. It's great. Keep it simple. So that's the other thing too with prop making. If anybody knows a lot about like Star Wars, most of their props in Star Wars are like just repurposed things, right? Or they're either like a lot of the blasters are World War II guns that people have like added little things on, lightsabers or flashes and other things from cameras. There's even Qui-Gon Jinn speaking into a Bic razor, right? They literally just repainted a Bic razor, but it looks cool and nobody cares, right? When you're watching the movie for the first time at least, you're not going to care at all, right? It looked cool. And when you're making props, that a lot of times actually for film, people do want that kind of found item kind of kit bashed together. And when I say kit bashed, it means just like taking multiple things and putting them together with screws and glue and a bunch of things like that, as opposed to somebody who just like found something cool, hit print on a 3D printer, even though that takes a whole lot of effort and it is not easy. It's one of those things that kind of seems easy, right? So a customer might be like, well, I mean, did you scratch build this from hand? Yeah. Did you whittle this down with like, I don't know, a whittling knife? Like that sounds cool. And sometimes people want that more. And if you're making a box, for example, like we just made a box, we made it out of wood the way you would make it back when like they built the box. Now I happen to just outsource that to somebody who was a woodworker who happened to have a lot of the tools that was the same kind of tools that the person would have used to make the box back in like the 1800s. But I was able to even take that video of him like making it and send it to the customer. The customer was like, "That's awesome," right? It's like the box doesn't even look nearly as good as a modern made like store-bought box would because it's, you know, not put together exactly right, but the authenticity is there, right? So thinking outside the box, no pun intended, is a very important thing to do, right? You're going to want to plan from the beginning, right? The other thing too is if you're making something for somebody else, ask lots of questions. Make sure you preface things with, "Hey, I'm going to get this close," right? Like it's going to be really close. It's going to be, if you're charging a bunch of money for it, if you're professionally doing it, then it needs to be really close. If you're doing it for a friend or somebody else like that, please just be upfront with people, right? If you're going to make somebody a giant scythe that's supposed to be 8.5 feet long and they're like a 4 foot tall person, you probably need to size it to them, right? So planning out that and actually making it to the point where they might think it's going to be this giant thing, and then you're thinking in your head it's not going to be. How many people here have made what they would consider like a prop that that they would carry with them in like a cosplay? Okay, you can raise your hands real big. I have armor on, so I can't get that high. Okay, so about 5-6 people. And then how many people have never made a prop at all? All right, so we got probably 15 people who have never made a prop at all. So now that helps me. Again, with the prep of making a prop, you're also going to figure out, okay, what's it going to be made of? And then how am I going to glue or screw it together? And the biggest thing I will say is when you're making and I'll probably say this again, but I want to like be really clear. When you're making a prop or a piece of armor or anything for costuming, you're going to at one point come across a time where you're like, man, if it breaks, it's going to break right here. You know that it's going to break, and it will break right there. Just fix it right then. Just reinforce it right then. I promise you it will break right then. I wish somebody would have told me that a long time ago. Anybody who maybe has made a prop before, if something breaks, it usually does break right when you're where you think it will. And then the other thing around that is as you're making a prop, you don't want it to break at a convention, right? When you're there. So make it and then shake it till you break it is what I like to say, right? Mainly you are in your workshop already, you're already in the thing. And I know that you spend a lot of time on this thing, but it is way better to literally be like beat it up, maybe hit it against a wall here and there. Not like completely destroy it on purpose. Don't break it over your knee, but actually pretend like you're walking around a convention. Pretend like somebody clips it with their foot or whatever and see if it breaks. You'd much rather break it then, right? And again, that gets into materials. So if you're using like cardboard, it's probably going to break more than foam. And then, you're going to do better with like a metal pipe or a lot of aluminum is really good. So they make aluminum sheeting, and also people are always scared of metal. Aluminum's great, right? Like aluminum literally can cut, if it's a sheet, you can cut it with shears. We do a lot of foam work. This entire costume is pretty much made out of foam. And then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll back it with like a Warbla, or back it with like PVC sheet, things like that. Be careful with PVC, both in like tube form and then also in sheet form, because when you heat it, it does actually release some really bad stuff for you. I mean, in reality, almost everything that's plastic that you heat you shouldn't be breathing in, right? But PVC is specifically pretty bad for you. Just make sure you do it in a ventilated area. Maybe have a respirator on. That'd be awesome. So that's a lot of the materials you can use. We've also, I mentioned for a second Warbla. Who here has heard of Warbla? Okay, so Warbla is there's about half. Warbla is a sheet of basically a thermoplastic, right? So you can do a couple different things with it, but it's a sheet of plastic that you can heat up. What's nice about it is, depending on the kind, you can cut it into strips and designs, and then heat it and then push it onto itself, and then it will stay there. So you don't have to use as much glue. But really, I don't typically use Warbla as much anymore. I tend to use 3D printed pieces, and then I tend to use like foam. And I like and metal, as I've talked about. And I like the fact that super glue is able to glue all those things together. And when I say super glue, like if you write any one thing down, I promise you that I'm not sponsored by them, but I am somebody who buys a lot of their glue. BSI, Bob Smith Industries, MaxiCure super glue, and MaxiCure is the super glue that is, it's thick. It's actually like thick. It's the pink stuff. We actually sell some on our website too. Get that bottle. It's like they sell it in 2 ounces, 6 ounces, 10 ounces for like a refill. But MaxiCure super glue, and then the MaxiCure is the thick stuff. That is crazy important. If the bottle is open, I have no problem like turning it upside down and like where it would drip on my hand. It's not going to drip out of that bottle. It will work the way that you think that super glue should work. And if anybody has past experience using like Gorilla Glue or something from like the hardware store that's super runny and like watery, that's a nightmare, right? It will get everywhere. It will crust up on your fingers. It will literally ruin your clothes and a bunch of other stuff. And people are like, wait, I hate super glue. Well, it's probably because you just haven't used the right kind of super glue. It doesn't have to be Bob Smith. Just make sure it's like thick and like works the way kind of it should. I also definitely recommend getting the Instaset spray, which is like a little spray bottle with it, and you can just spray whatever it is that you're putting together. And you put glue on one side, put the Instaset spray on the other, and then you just stick it together, and it will actually stick together in like 10 seconds usually. It's also very strong and good for gap filling, which a lot of people were asking me like how I put together my 3D prints. It's almost all MaxiCure super glue, right? I buy a lot of it, and it's worth it. And I've tried to put together my prints with like soldering them together and doing all kinds of other stuff, and it's way better to just use the super glue. Caveat to that is if you get any super glue hot with like a heat gun, or if you put super glue on something and then you're like, oh, it's not quite glued enough, I'm going to put some hot glue on top of it. It will burn your eyes. There will be problems. You will have to run outside and make sure that you have lots of like fresh air on your eyes. I've had that happen way more times than I can count, and it hurts. So don't get super glue warm, like hot in any way. Other adhesives and ways of putting things together. Super glue. I mean, I'm sorry, not super glue, but hot glue. Most people have talked about hot glue, seen hot glue. A lot of people will start with hot glue. Understand that hot glue is great in certain situations. If you really have like a big gap and you need to form together hot glue. I do. I use hot glue to make all the little like, I guess, spikes on here. That's all the stuff that looks like it's like frost is all just hot glue. And what I did is I just put hot glue on it and then hung the sword like this, and it kind of just dripped down onto a piece of cardboard, right? And then it just looked very drippy. So hot glue is actually just a thermoplastic, and you can cast things out of it and all sorts of stuff. I like it much better as a like actual thermoplastic to kind of sculpt and make stuff out of than I do to actually join things together. But if you're joining things together, there are many different kinds of hot glue. There's the normal kind that you'd use as a kid, and that's what a lot of cosplayers start with, and that's a pretty big mistake. Then they make like Cosplay hot glue, which comes in black or silver or normal clear, and it has a lower melting temp or a higher melting temperature. So like today, it wasn't this sword, but we had another sword that had like a bunch of hot glue like flames on it. We went outside for just 2 seconds to take a photo shoot, and that sword started melting off the thing. I came back in, I'm like, okay, we'll just super glue it on there. We'll super glue the hot glue flames on there, right? But we want to make sure that stays on there, and super glue is not going anywhere, and hot glue will. It will melt. But Cosplay hot glue is a thing, and it comes in black. And holy crap, if I'm going to go ahead and like fix something real quick with some hot glue, I want to make sure that it's black hot glue and not clear hot glue and looks weird. Clear hot glue, though, is great for doing stuff like crystals or some type of thing that needs to look like it's fire or ice or something like that. And then they also have construction grade hot glue, which is awesome and really is not going to come apart and actually has a much higher heating temperature thing. Understand that there are different things. And there's also fabric hot glue. A lot of people are like, hey, I don't want to know how to sew, but I need to like, hem up something. There is actual fabric hot glue you can use for that. There's probably also like hem tape and a few other things. But that's not bad to have like in your kit. And then other adhesives or ways to join things together. Of course, you have things like screws are fantastic. I can't tell you enough how much like a set screw, which is basically a little screw that like pushes two things together and holds them in place, but then you can unscrew it and it basically sits. Camera equipment, actually this thing right here, right? So this will unscrew. We buy this kind of stuff for like microphones and cameras, and we'll literally just include that in our props, and then all of a sudden our prop can come apart. That staff just has this piece and this piece on it, and it comes apart, and it's already made well, and it costs like a couple bucks, and I'm not trying to recreate the wheel with, some 3D printed hinge that's not metal, or not hinge, but screw that's not metal. There's a lot to it. But understand that like, if you go ahead and use metal, you can super glue it together. Again, Bob Smith, Max Secure works on metal. And then also it just is going to like be pre-made to go together, and it's not going anywhere. It's metal. Also, when people are like, hey, well, what about going through con check? Like, they don't care. As long as it's mostly covered with foam or it's not a dangerous weapon that you've made. If it has a little bit of metal in it, it's fine. If they, like, wand your prop and it beeps, you can be like, yeah, I put it together with metal. And a lot of times they're like, that's awesome. And have a great con, right? They're not going to care that there's metal in there. So screws, nuts, and bolts are great. If you aren't familiar with those, there's plenty of, it's just like anything else. There's plenty of like YouTube tutorials on all sorts of stuff. But understand that like literally using some construction screws are really awesome to like keep things together. And then my probably personal favorite, which is what this entire costume is like put together with, is obviously some glue, but then zip ties, right? So I actually have a pocket full of zip ties on my daily. And they make reusable zip ties, which are like a little bit bigger. We have them all over our booth. I have a couple of them that I've attached this with. But this fur cape, I have some clips that I've like clipped together and attached on there, but one of the clips was like off, so I just popped a hole in this, put a zip tie to it, and then now I've zip tied it down below my armor, and I'm good. So they're great for like quick repairs. But then you can also just build with them. And also you can hold things together like a clamp with zip ties and then glue it, and then it's good. So honestly, having all sorts of different sizes and shapes of zip ties is good. I use them all the time, and I can't tell you how often I'm super glad that I put together a prop with like, if it's a chain and I'm trying to connect a chain to the end of like a mace or something, a lot of times they make metal zip ties, right? So you can just put a metal zip tie or two on there, and then trim them off, and it looks like it's another link in the chain or whatever. It's fine. Nobody cares, and it's together, and it's nice and good, and you didn't have to like figure it out. You didn't have to tape it together. There's a lot of other things. It's very quick. Also, the way I like to build props, and we'll get into that in a second, is I like to just go for it, and I don't like to pattern. There are a lot of people who pattern, and I have no problem with that. My wife loves to pattern. She does sewing, and she does like the patterns off of foam and a bunch of other things. I'd rather just kind of form fit it, make it look cool. Does that look cool? Quickly and rapidly prototype. And I use zip ties all the time to just connect things together because I'm going to snip them off. So I've made Cable from X-Men. I made his arm plenty of times, multiple versions just for myself. I don't think there's been a single time I pattern out anything. I just started putting things on there and then zip tying it on. And does that feel comfortable? Can I move in this? That sort of thing. And also a lot of my first original ones, you could see the zip ties. Like I just left them on there and spray painted the whole damn thing silver, and it still looked fine, right? Because it worked with the aesthetic, right? If you were doing it professionally, probably don't have them showing, but there's a lot of things you can do to cover up stuff. Those are probably my main connectors. I probably am forgetting something. Any questions so far, though? Okay, I could go way more into adhesives. There's also contact cement, which is really, really nice. I wouldn't recommend contact cement as much because it's very toxic to breathe in, and a lot of people I'll tell about, and I'm like, you have to use this outside, you have to use this with a respirator, and then they'll send me a picture of being like, look, I did it, and I'm like, they're in the basement. I'm like, damn, man, you're hurting your brain right now. Don't get me wrong, I've definitely done plenty of that myself, but I don't want you guys, learn from my mistakes, right? It's just a thing. I know that you think it won't happen to you, but there's been enough issues with people. There's also E6000 or E9000, I think it is. Not the best to get on your skin, so if you're going to use it, use gloves. It does bond things together, but there's like warnings on it and things like that. Make sure to use gloves, make sure to use respirators. I understand that I'm not your dad and I'm not going to be there to like watch over you on that one, but for your own safety, please make sure you get those things. And like use them properly too. Don't have your mask on like half on when you're sitting there spray painting. I prefer to just spray paint outside and make sure I actually have a fan that I have outside. So the fan is going outside and I can spray paint and it's not bad. And a lot of times I'm not using a respirator at all, but it's going away from me and it's a lot better. I didn't always do that. We talked about spray paint a second ago, so I'm going to get into some paints. Again, please stop me if you have any questions. Probably my favorite piece of advice to give people, and the one that everybody's like, oh, really, kind of. There's words on the back of your spray cans. You're allowed to read those, right? Nobody ever does. I didn't for the longest time. Like, I'm talking years into, like, making stuff. Until I was like, why is it not working well? Why is it crackling? Why are there issues going on? So spray cans, all of them have a recoat time. And if anything, you just look at the recoat time, and what it is it'll say like a recoat time, like 2 hours to 24 hours. And all that means is you have up to 2 hours to spray it again with another coat of whatever spray paint it is, or another color, or like a clear coat. Or you have to wait 24 hours, and then you can do it again. But if you wait like 10 hours, right, it's going to mess up because that's the way the spray paint works. And it's wild that nobody ever reads it. Like I said, I didn't ever read that either, but there's a recoat time. Please familiarize yourself with that. If you want to get really good at like spray cans and rattle cans, what they call them, there's tons of really awesome like auto mechanic YouTube videos, and that's like they know what they're doing, right? They're sitting there making sure everything's completely dust free, and they're using tack cloth, some things. They can get way into it. Typically, don't need to do that too much. The spray can that I recommend to everybody, and we still use it today, is Rust-Oleum Flat Black 2X, and make sure it's flat black. It's actually going to go on to almost all of your projects much, much better than a semi-gloss or a gloss. If you want something to be shiny, it is your best bet to just hit it with multiple coats of clear coat at the very, very end. You'll see like those, Magneto helmets. They're bowling ball, like they look like bowling balls, right? The person spent a lot of time sanding it, and I promise you they didn't start with gloss, right? Maybe. Not everybody does something different, but what you want to do is you want to paint the thing completely. You want to sand it really well, then you want to paint it really well, then you want to just take your time and hit like 12 layers of gloss clear coat if you have time, right? And again, that recoat time comes in handy. You have to set a watch and make sure that if it's a recoat time of 2 hours, you want to make sure that you're out there before 2 hours happens and spinning it around and doing it again. So if you want to make something really glossy, of course it has to be smooth in the first place, so you have to sand it down really well. but you can get that real like bowling ball glass type finish if you just go over it over and over with clear coat. And gloss clear coat is fine. And again, I use Rust-Oleum clear coat. There's a lot of other really good clear coats that are out there. A thing about clear coat, it will dull your chrome, okay, and gold. So people are like, man, I made this awesome sword and I chromed it and was like this nice mirror finish, and I want to protect it, and I got my gloss clear coat and it's glossy, so I'm gonna gloss it and it'll be great and it'll be even better and it won't chip. And then they'll hit it with that one layer of gloss, will literally dull the entire blade, and all of a sudden, womp womp, it just looks terrible, right? Or it doesn't look that like mirror finish. So be careful with clear coat as far as the gloss clear coat. It doesn't work on chrome, and it doesn't work on like shiny mirror. They do, well, a lot of it doesn't. They do have some high end, like automobile kind. It's usually the kind of like, it's like 2-part. You have to break, and it costs like $20 a can. That will gloss over top of it. So just like anything else, and this goes with building or gluing or painting or anything else, test your stuff, right? So I know it can be annoying, but if you've spent a bunch of time making a prop and it's looking great and it's nice and shiny and it's everything you want it to be, and you go for that last layer of like clear coat, you want to make sure it's good. And I do recommend clear coating all your stuff because it'll make it last a lot longer. Make sure that you maybe test it first. The other thing too is if you're not sure if it's going to crackle, do like the back end of it or whatever, just on like one side, and let it sit for like an hour or two and make sure that it's nothing, that it looks good, and then do the whole thing. You can also very, very lightly gloss, like mist spray with gloss, and it kind of sort of settles on the thing, and then you give it a little bit, and then you can cover the whole thing and hit it with a harder spray. That's also a big thing that we do with gloss clear coat a lot. I know I've jumped way ahead to the very final stage of painting with clear coat, but honestly, it's probably one of the hardest things because people spend all the time making something look awesome and then they'll mess it up, and it's enough to make people just completely quit, right? Other paints, you can use all sorts of different kind of paints, but be aware that there is enamel and there is, I'm drawing a complete blank, but it's the other one's not enamel. Wow. So there's two kinds of spray paint. They don't mix well, right? I'll think of it in a minute. So for the most part, you want to just use, if you're using like Rust-Oleum, you want to continue to use Rust-Oleum. If you're using Krylon, you want to continue to use Krylon, right? They are usually made to work together. Not all of them can overlap. And again, you want to test things, right? It's driving me crazy. I can't remember right now, but I'm blanking. The other thing too is when you're hand painting, you can use acrylic paints. We use a lot of like water-based acrylic paint. That's super helpful because if it gets on your hand or all that, it's fine. It's not super messy. Best thing to take spray paint off and paint off is just Dawn dish soap. Like honestly, everybody's like, hey, how do you get paint out of like clothes, or how do you get paint off your hands? Dawn dish soap is awesome for that. And then in general, if you're painting really, really bright colors, but you don't want to paint a bright color, it's hard to paint bright colors over top of black, right? So I do recommend hitting almost everything with black at the start, but if it's going to be like a rainbow thing or something with super bright colors, you're going to want to either start with a white or at least a gray primer, and then you're going to go over top of that. So sometimes we'll go black because the handle needs to be like a silver, and black goes great over silver, or silver goes great over black. And then if I have the other part of it, I'm going to tape it off with painter's tape. And then I'm going to hit it with white to just make sure I have that nice bright like start. And then I can hit it over again. So I can take the same can of red, and go over black, and it's going to look like a dark maroon probably. Depends on the red. And then I'll hit the same can over a white primer, and it will look vibrant. It'll look like the red in her bows back there. So for sure, there's a big difference in your undercoat. I understand that seems very simple and like obvious, but it's one of those things that people are like, hey, my thing didn't come out quite the way I wanted it to. If you want nice, vibrant colors, you have to start with a light base. And then when you're hand painting stuff, you can use all sorts of stuff. You can paint with a rag, and if one of my friends was here, he'd be laughing at me because He was like, what the hell do you mean paint with a rag? I mean actually paint with a rag. You know what doesn't have brush strokes? A rag. You know what? If you don't want brush strokes on your thing, if I was painting this sword, I don't know if I did this with a brush or a rag or whatever, but it started off black. I want some silver on top of it. I can spray some silver into a rag and then just wipe that on there, and it'll work really well. I can also take a brush, and I can, we'll go over this in the next thing, but I can take a brush, dab a little silver on there, and then just kind of like highlight it or dry brush it, as a lot of people will call it, and then that'll also work. But if I'm doing that, I'm going to get brush strokes a lot of times. You can use the side of your brush, and I use things like, they're called chip brushes. They're really big. I learned how to start painting in miniatures. That was super frustrating, right? It's like way too small, and I didn't really like it too much. I wanted to just war game, or I wanted to play the game. But I learned a lot in that. And now that I'm painting props all the time, I just use bigger brushes. And I can't tell you how many times somebody will talk to me and they're like, well, it took me so long to paint that. And I'm like, so how'd you do it? And they're like, well, I painted it. And I'm like, how big was your brush? And they'll talk to me about like painting this whole prop with a little tiny brush that they're meant to like do miniatures with or something. You can get bigger brushes. You can get a rag. You can get, and like, it's going to save you time. It's probably even going to look better. They also have foam brushes. So like just, foam. That's also not going to give you any type of brush strokes at all. And the nice thing about foam brushes, or even like a paper towel, is if you want to kind of like make something look like it's, I guess, like poisoned. A lot of times we do it for poisoned, and it just has like a weird like bubbly look. You can kind of dab. So that's a thing too. We'll cover that. But there's a lot of different ways of painting stuff. The biggest thing that I would say is, if it's for you, just try a couple of different things, and whatever works, works. If it's for somebody else, and this is just good advice in making props for people in general, keep them up to date on it, right? So the last thing you want to do is paint something, make something look super awesome, and then send them the final picture, and they're like, that's not what I was going for. And most people that you're making for, friends or whatever, they want like an update anyway. They're excited. So pull out your phone, take progress pics. That's also something that's great. You want to take progress pics because a lot of times you're going to want to remake the thing that you made. Oh, that's something else that is super key. You're going to make a prop, your first prop or your third prop or your 100th prop, and it's going to look pretty good or not. But I promise you, if you just remake it right away after that, it will look twice as good. Okay? So there's so many times where I'll see somebody else or myself, and we'll make like a knee pad or shoulder pad, and I'll make it, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. And then it's like, okay, well, I have to make another one. I make the other one, and it looks so much better than the first one that I have to make a third one to make them look both good, to make them both look good, right? And a lot of times what I'll do now is I'll just quick prototype something, like an elbow pad or a shoulder pad or something, and then I'll get it glued together or zip tied together, and then I'll literally cut it and heat form it and flatten it out, and there's my pattern, right? And because I didn't want to start with a pattern, but then I have a pattern, I know it looks good, I know it works well. So that's kind of a little backward, quick prototyping. A lot of people want to measure a whole lot and make sure they've sketched everything out. That's typically not the way we do things. That said, if a customer is asking for a sketch, then I have to probably, if I agree to make a sketch, I have to make a sketch of some sort. Any questions so far? No questions. Usually people are asking questions. Anybody have something they're like, hey, I ran into this problem when I was making this thing and I don't know what the hell it was. Maybe you can answer it. All right, Chainsaw Man. Yeah. I hear you. Okay. So he was just saying that somebody recommended covering probably foam, right, with Plasti Dip? Yeah, so actually all this foam that's on me was covered with Plasti Dip. I do recommend it. There's things like Creature Cast and other stuff. There's truck line, bed liner stuff, which is Basically something you can use to cover foam. But Plasti Dip is a really popular one. We use it all the time on our foam, but I get exactly what you're saying because it is drippy. And the other thing with Plasti Dip is you got to shake it really well. It smells really bad. Make sure you use it in a ventilated area, but it does like stick to things and get sticky. I would recommend hitting it with lighter coats instead of going too crazy with it right away because you can do multiple coats on it. It does build up pretty well. Now, it will lose some detail if you go crazy with it. Also, with Plasti Dip, it's one of those that, almost with everything now, I hang stuff when I'm spraying it. So the best thing I can tell you and the easiest thing to do is just get a pack of bungee cords, right? And then you can either just bungee it to something that or you can like loop it over something, like even a tree branch, and then you have 2 hooks that you can hook something on. I know not everybody has the best spray booth area, but a bungee cord set is enough to give you like hooks that you can hook stuff on. So if you can't hook something, like it's flat though, you'd want to put it on like a piece of cardboard probably, right? And they also make things like, actually one of the things we do all the time is we'll use the caps of our spray paint, right? We'll flip them upside down and put the prop on the caps so it's off the table a little bit, and that way you can do it that way. But a lot of times I'll do that on top of a piece of cardboard or wood, and then I can use that and move that around so I don't ever have to touch the thing while it's drying. Also, just give stuff a lot of time to dry, right? It sounds like if it was sticky, it just wasn't set yet. And Plasti Dip's also weird because it doesn't look right when it first comes out and it's first drying. So everybody flips out and they're like, oh, it's going to be bad. It's going to ruin my project. It will like self-level out, right? Did that answer any of your question? Okay, yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, Plasti Dips is an amazing product, and it's one of those things that, like, when I'm painting, I don't use it for everything, especially we don't use it on plastic, which is wild because it's called Plasti Dip, right? But we don't, what it is, it's like that rubber stuff. So if you have a hammer and there's like a rubber grip on it, that's probably been like dipped in some type of Plasti Dip. That's kind of what that is. And it doesn't work great on plastic pieces. And the reason it doesn't work great on plastic pieces is eventually it will coat the whole thing, and then it will get like a little hole in it, and then it will literally just peel off, right? Just like any other type of like I said, a grip on a hammer or something. So if you're painting 3D printed pieces, or you're painting like a Nerf type like product or something, make sure that you're sanding it really well so your paint adheres to it. I didn't talk about sanding, and that's crazy because that's like a lot of prop making, right? So regardless if it's foam or if it's 3D printed or if it's a Nerf gun or anything else like that, you have to sand the thing, right? And understand there are many, many different grips of sandpaper, and there's grits of sandpaper, and there's a lot of different things you can do for sanding. You can use hand sanders, like little mouse sanders. That'll help a lot. But you can look up sanding tutorials and all that stuff. But please do yourself a favor, especially if it's a toy. A lot of people are like, hey, this toy's like chipping a whole bunch. If it's a toy, a lot of times people just went over it with spray paint, and they were like, hey, it's black now, or it's gray now. And that's awesome for a second, but then the usually like the mold release they've used on the toy is still kind of on there, right? So that will basically make that paint chip. So you do want to give a good layer of like at least 120, if not a little bit higher, maybe 220, 300, all over the whole thing, just to make sure that the paint has something to grip to. And if you look at like basics of painting, of like spray can, rattle can painting, or even air gun painting, it's gonna be sanding, right? Sanding is the very first step on any of your projects. Any other questions? Yeah. I like to give my foam rigidity, right? Because a lot of times people are like, hey, I'll stand up in a minute, or even this, right? So this is actually does happen to be all foam, but I even have, I can pass this around, or people can look at it. There's a couple different like layers of foam in here. One, to make it grip my arm better, but then two, it's kind of like inside I don't care, but it's gonna back it more. In reality, if I was going to like make something like this that was half open, like a bracer that had my arm open, I'd want to back that with a piece of plastic probably. The foam's great because you can beat up the foam, make it look awesome. You can plastic dip it, and it'll be great. But if it's just kind of just the foam, and I run into that with this costume too. I made this costume over 10 years ago, so when I was learning, and I didn't like back it with as many with stuff. We've since repaired it a little bit, and some places are back, some of them aren't. And then the other thing too is I kind of want this to squish. Because it's foam, I can kind of squish it down in the bin, and then it will sort of come back. And heat guns are great for making things. If you're ever using something that's foam, and you like step on it, it's like a boot part or something, and it like cracks. And even if it's painted and it's plastic dip, you can always hit it with a heat gun, and a lot of times those cracks will pop right back out, and it'll be good as new. Other things, tools wise, heat guns are amazing. Be careful with them; they will burn you. And hot glue guns are great. And so are Dremels, and they make every one of those hot glue guns, heat guns, and Dremels wireless off of batteries. And I'm super jealous that anybody that's getting into it now can just like not mess with cords. I will say that I still use a corded heat gun a lot because it does get hotter, but be aware that you can spend literally like $30, $40 on a, like I have a bunch of Ryobi ones because that's what they make. But I have a wireless heat gun, wireless hot glue gun, and a wireless Dremel. And the nice thing about the heat gun and the hot glue gun is they auto shut off, right? So I don't worry about having them plugged in and having it be a major fire hazard or something like that. I usually just take the battery out anyway because I want to recharge it because they do run through battery a lot. But that makes your life so much easier rather than trying to like pull out a hot glue gun and work on a costume and have some cords and that sort of thing. I also happen to run a makerspace, so we have a bunch of different kind of tools and things like that, and I teach people how to use this stuff all the time. But I will say that some of the wireless tools has changed the game. And also, wireless Dremels are like that perfect level of quiet, but still can take care of foam and a lot of other things. I don't know if I'd want to use a wireless Dremel on like a lot of wood because it's not quite as powerful, kind of like the heat gun. But for like foam and a lot of cosplay things, it's great. And it's actually quieter than a normal Dremel. I know a lot of people have concerns about where they're building or sound and stuff like that. When you are using a Dremel or sandpaper and you're hitting foam or anything else, again, use a respirator. That's one of those things you just got to do. Foam is definitely one of those things that we laser cut a lot. I've laser cut some pieces on the sword, actually a lot of the sword. And you'll see like, I don't know, this little, the Space Wolf symbol here. Like this thing right here is just foam. This has been laser cut or laser etched. It works great in the laser, but not everybody has a laser cutter. And then if you do have a laser cutter, a lot of times, or if you have access to one like in like libraries and things like that, you may have to talk to the manager or whatever, put on your Karen hat, I guess. I don't know. That's an old joke, but you have to, convince them a lot of times that you do actually have to, that you are able to, like, it's safe to laser cut EVA foam. And some people will argue with that and say, like, just no. I know I've had to research it a lot because we have some laser cutters, and it is safe to do it. You want to make sure it's ventilated, but it laser cut's great, right? So a lot of cosplayers are like, yeah, dude, EVA foam is amazing for that kind of thing. They also make tons and tons of different kinds of foam. Made by lots of different people. Density is one of those things that matters. Color is some of those things that matters. I'm friends with the guy that makes only gray foam, SKS Props. He makes the HD foam. It's awesome foam. We have lots of rolls of it. I will say there's a couple times that I'm like, man, I really need this to be black, and I'll use something else because I'll put it in for padding, and I don't really want to like plastic dip it, right? I'm just like throwing it in here. I just need it to be black. So having a good variety of different thicknesses of foam and then all different colors of foam is one of those things I would recommend. Any other questions? Weathering. Again, with the whole like dry brushing is definitely a good thing. They make weathering powders that you can basically buy. We got 5 minutes? Thank you. Weathering powders are pretty great for like really getting really detailed. They're kind of expensive. If you're making a big prop and you're wanting to make it very like rusty, you could use some weathering powder. But most of the time and they also make, we just actually got it, it's called just like rust. I'll have to like post a picture of it on our social or something. And it's fantastic. It's just a little bottle. It's literally paint that you dip a brush in there, put it in the corners, and it literally makes something that looks like rust. And it's fantastic. It's awesome. But if you're just doing it with normal acrylic paint, I would say your best bet is to use like the side of your brush. And like in the weathering and paint workshop that we're doing right after this, 15 minutes after this is done, we'll be doing some weathering. A lot of it is just dry brushing or it's greasing, or it's actually called washing, right? So you want to make sure if something's super clean, you might go over it with a dark brown or a black, and then like really cake it on there, and then take a rag or a paper towel and wipe it off. And all that is just it's just a wash, right? So it's getting down in those like cracks. And I swear there are so many things that look pretty good, and then somebody will do a wash on it and like, perfect. It looks awesome. It looks, almost night and day difference. And before I thought it looked pretty good, and then you just wash it and it's so much better, right? And same with like some highlighting, right? And for example, I made this a long time ago. If I was making this now, this like dent that I have in here, you probably can't see it very well, right? Like I definitely weathered the actual foam, but I probably could have gone over here and actually highlighted like the outside of that dent with like a different color, like steel or, silver, and it would have made the whole thing look that much more battle damaged. And depending on what you're doing, you want to test it. You don't want to go too far with it, but a lot of times a little bit more weather and a little bit more detail does go a long way. Don't be afraid to try something. What I tell people all the time is, you made it once, you can make it again, probably better. You can also just spray it back over with the spray paint with a black and start from the beginning for paint. Typically, people don't have to do that because they're very happy with the thing how it came out. But a lot of people are really afraid to make something and it looks nice and clean, like this thing. At the beginning, this looked totally like clean and it was awesome, and I didn't have any of these little marks in it. And then I was like, well, it needs to be weathered. And so I took a Dremel and Dremeled it out, and I took like a screw and just drug it along there and just ripped up that foam. And a lot of people just aren't prepared or want to mess with the thing that they've just spent a long time making look super clean. But that's the awesome thing about going fast and prototyping fast, is because even if you have that other prototype or even just a spare piece of foam next to you, then you can practice your weathering on that and be like, oh, shit, that does look a lot better, right? That's way better, so I'm going to continue to do that. Just like anything else, practice makes perfect. Also, understand you're going to make mistakes. That's fine. You're also going to just get better with the more things you make. I do challenge people a lot of times when anytime anybody comes up, if somebody wants to come up to me after this and talk to me, and you're like, hey, here's this prop I made, how do I make it better? I promise you my answer is going to be, make it again. Just make it again, and I promise everything that you did wrong on it or mess with or anything at all, it'll be better because you'll have that experience, the past experience of making that exact same prop. And we do the same thing with stuff that we make all the time over and over. Our very first product that we come out with, maybe the hinges aren't quite the right hinges, and they work, but it doesn't work quite well, so I'll get like a better hinge to make it happen. Any type of production, any type of stuff like that, you're just going to do better the second time or the 8th time they make it. I know we're at 5 minutes. Any quick questions or anything? Okay, then I'm going to do some promo. Again, my name is James Wulfgar. I'm going to run a painting workshop right after this in the workshop room. That is a paid workshop. I believe it's like $20 or $25 a person. Tomorrow, I put it on our Wulfgar Props Instagram and Facebook. Please follow us there too. But we're doing, I think, 2 panels in a workshop tomorrow too. They're on the panel rooms. I'm not positive what time. I think the first one starts at like 11:30. All the panels are free. The other workshop tomorrow is also paid, and it is finishing 3D printing. And then on tomorrow night, I think it's 7:00. I'm doing a panel on like making money as a cosplayer and being like invited kind of as a guest and being a professional type of in that way, which is a really fun. I mean, we'll talk about everything from like, do you need your own business, that sort of thing, to strategy on doing that kind of stuff. And then also on Sunday, I have one panel, and it's just going to be cosplaying on a budget. And the cosplaying on a budget, that's also a huge one because it's stuff like, hey, buy some belts from Goodwill, and that way you have them on hand when somebody's paying you to make something and you don't want to make a leather belt real quick. You can just use a Goodwill belt and they're happy, right? So that's all there is to that. I also do have a booth. I'm not sure what number it is. We have a big flag sticking up. It's the Wulfgar props one. It's in the middle of the vendor area, like almost center of the vendor area. Please stop by, talk to my team. They would love to. They're all builders. They're all people that would love to talk to you about this, and I'll be around too. I'll be wearing this hat all weekend. If you see me wearing the hat, please come say hi. Don't be a stranger, and thank you for coming.